Assassins are almost perfectly silent. But Set never lies. He was very good, but not good enough. Rejected, but not without a mission.
You're... Oh, an Omega.
The assassin was for the king, but the Omega killed him first. The candle had burned down to its last inch. I knew, because I had lit it myself 3 hours ago, when I took my position in the shadow behind the eastern column of the king's private corridor, and told myself I would not move until the work was done. I had not moved. My back was flat against the cold stone. My breathing was controlled 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the way my handler had drilled into me at age 9 in a frozen training room in the borderlands, while other girls my age were learning embroidery. My heartbeat was low, deliberate. The kind of calm that doesn't come from the absence of fear, it comes from having made peace with every possible outcome before the danger arrives. I smelled him before I heard him. That is the thing about professionally trained killers that amateurs never understand. They are almost perfectly silent. No dragging feet. No heavy breath. A ghost moving through stone corridors at 2 a.m., dressed in palace livery, carrying a blade thin enough to slip between a sleeping man's ribs without waking him. Almost perfectly silent. But scent does not lie. Beneath the palace soap and the borrowed uniform, beneath the carefully neutral smell he had tried to construct, I caught it. Iron. Black cedar. And under that, something chemical. Adrenaline suppressor. The kind sold in 3 cities in the known world, 2 of which had extradition treaties with the Iron Court. He was very good. I was better. I let him pass my column. Let him take 4 more steps toward the king's chamber door, close enough to commit, far enough that he couldn't reverse course without losing the initiative. I tracked the width of his shoulders, the angle of his grip on the blade, the slight forward lean that told me he was right-handed and trained to lunge. Noted. I stepped out of the shadow. He spun faster than most, I'll give him that. The blade came up in a clean arc, elbow tucked, wrist locked, exactly the way you'd move if you'd been taught by someone expensive. His eyes found me in the dark, and I watched the calculation happen behind them. Small. Female. Omega uniform. Not a threat. He actually relaxed his grip. Just slightly. That was the last mistake he ever made. I closed the distance in 2 steps, inside his reach before the blade could redirect, caught his knife arm at the wrist and elbow, twisted, and had his back against my chest before he could draw a breath to shout. My left arm locked around his throat. My right hand found the base of his skull. His neck snapped like a dry twig. He dropped. I stood over him in the flickering candlelight, heart rate at 62, and listened to the palace breathe around us. Silence. No alarm. No approaching footsteps. The East Corridor guard had rotated at 2 a.m., exactly as scheduled. The king's chamber door remained closed. I looked down at the man on the floor. Then I heard the door open behind me. I did not turn around immediately. That would have been reactive. Instead, I crouched, retrieved the assassin's blade from his limp hand, a beautiful thing, Eastern steel, worth more than I earned in 6 months of pretending to sweep floors and straighten slowly. Only then did I turn. King Caleb Drake stood in his own doorway. He was not dressed for sleep. He wore a loose unlaced shirt and dark trousers, a short blade in his right hand, and an expression I had not seen on his face in 43 days of studying him from the shadows, something past confusion, past calculation. Arriving at a territory his pride had apparently never needed to map before. Shock. Pure, unvarnished, where did my legend go shock? His eyes moved from the body on the floor to the blade in my hand to my face. I watched him recognize me. Watched the moment the pieces assembled themselves into something his mind refused to accept. The gray uniform. The Omega sash. The woman he had publicly, cheerfully dismissed as too weak in front of a hall full of laughing lords, not 3 weeks ago. standing over a professional assassin's corpse, holding the dead man's blade like it was a pen she'd picked up off a desk. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. "She is too weak," he had said. I tilted my head, just slightly, the way I had learned to do when I was filing away information for later use, and waited for him to say something that wasn't that. "You want to know what he said? You want to know what a 6'3" alpha king says when the woman he rejected is standing over the body of a man who came to kill him, holding a blade she didn't need, calm as January ice, waiting for him to catch up? Stay with me. If you want to find out whether Jessie Calloway survives the Alpha King's pride, or whether the Alpha King survives her, make sure you like this story and subscribe to the library. More fated tales are waiting for you. And trust me, this one is only getting started." Chapter 1: The Aftermath of the Impossible. He said nothing. That, in itself, was remarkable. King Caleb Drake had a reputation for never being without words, in court, in council, on the battlefield. His general had once told a story about the king delivering a full tactical assessment while being stitched up after a sword fight, not pausing once, not so much as hissing when the needle went in. But standing in his own corridor at 2 a.m., looking at me, he had nothing. I placed the dead man's blade carefully on the stone floor, a deliberate gesture, communicating I am not a threat to you without saying it, the way you'd set down a weapon in front of a wolf that hasn't decided yet whether to bite, and straightened. "You should go back inside, Your Majesty," I said. My voice came out the same way it always did, quiet, precise, without color. "I'll have him removed before the morning rotation." He stared at me. "You," he started, and then stopped. Started again. "How did you?" "Heard him in the east stairwell." Followed. I paused. "The guard rotation leaves a 4-minute window. Someone briefed him on it. You have an internal leak." More staring. I will tell you something about King Caleb Drake in that moment that no court portrait or war chronicle will ever capture. He looked, for the first time since I had arrived in his palace, genuinely lost. Not endangered. Not embarrassed, though that was building behind his eyes like a storm over the borderlands. Just lost. Like a man who had very carefully constructed a map of the world, and had just discovered the map was missing an entire continent. The continent was apparently 5'4", and had been sweeping his corridors for 6 weeks. "You're an Omega," he said, as if reminding me. "I'm aware," I said. "Omegas don't." He gestured at the body. At me. At the body again. "Clearly some do." He closed his mouth. His jaw worked once, the way it did when he was processing something his instincts were refusing to accept. I had watched that jaw for 6 weeks. I knew all its movements. It was, objectively, an exceptional jaw carved, as I had once privately noted, by someone with a genuine grudge against softness, but right now it was doing something I hadn't cataloged yet. It was uncertain. Good. Uncertain men ask questions instead of issuing orders. Questions I could manage. "What is your name?" he said finally. I blinked. Slowly. He had never asked. In 43 days, in one public court appearance where he had rejected me in front of every lord in the realm, in 6 weeks of passing me in corridors where I carried linens and candles and the occasional decorative arrangement, he had never once asked my name. "Jessie," I said. "Jessie Calloway." "Your Majesty." Something moved across his face that I didn't have a name for yet. I filed it away. "Jessie Calloway," he repeated, like he was testing the weight of it. "Yes. Who sent you?" And there it was. The right question, finally, about 6 weeks late, arriving fashionably disheveled in an unlaced shirt, but here nonetheless. I had prepared 3 answers at varying levels of truth. I selected the middle one. "Someone who knew the contract had been purchased," I said carefully. "Someone who wanted it intercepted quietly." "Quietly," he repeated. "A man is dead in my corridor." "Quietly enough that your court won't know about it by morning," I said. "Which is what matters. The contract was a probe, Your Majesty. Whoever purchased it will wait for confirmation that it succeeded, and when it doesn't come, they'll know they have a problem. That gives us a window." Us. I met his eyes directly for the first time. In the torchlight they were dark amber, a color I hadn't expected from his public portraits, which all made them look simply brown. They were not simply brown. They were the color of something heated through. If you want to find out who wants you dead, I said, yes. Us. The silence that followed was different from the others. Less shocked. More measuring. I recognized the quality of it. It was the silence of a man recalculating, and recalculating fast. He was good at that, at least. You'll need to explain, he said slowly, a great deal more than that. I know, I said. But not in a corridor with a body. Go back inside. I'll return at dawn. He looked at me for a long moment. The amber in his eyes had shifted from shock to something with more edges. He was reassembling his authority. I could watch it happen, the way a man picks up a dropped sword and settles it back in his grip, and some distant, professionally neutral part of me noted that he did it quickly. He was not stupid. He had just, catastrophically, been wrong about something. Different problem. Harder to fix, but different. Dawn, he said finally. Dawn, I confirmed. He looked at the body one more time. Then at me. Then, and this is the part one have turned over in my mind on every quiet night since, he gave me a single, small nod. Not the nod of a king acknowledging a servant. Not even the nod of an alpha acknowledging a subordinate. It was the nod of one professional recognizing another. He went back inside. I disposed of the body with the efficiency of someone who had done it before and would not be doing it for the last time. The east corridor was clean before the rotation guard returned. The assassin's blade went into the lining of my maintenance bag, next to the scent-masking compound and the small coded journal I'd been keeping since day one. By the time I returned to the Omega quarters and lay down on my narrow bed, I had been awake for 20 hours. I stared at the ceiling and thought, for the first time since arriving at the Iron Court, that this mission had just become significantly more complicated. Because the king had looked at me like I was a continent he intended to explore. And I had briefly, dangerously, professionally, inappropriately let him. Chapter 2, What Secrets Cost. I arrived at the king's private study at dawn, as promised. He was already there. Dressed properly now, dark wool, no crown, a cup of something hot going cold at his elbow, seated behind the kind of desk that communicated absolute authority through sheer mass of dark oak and state documents. 2 guards at the door. No lord advisors. He had, I noted, wanted this conversation to be private. Smart. I sat in the chair across from him without being invited. I watched his eyes register that, and let him feel it. There are things you concede on the first day of a working partnership and things you do not. Sitting when spoken to was one of the things I did not. To his credit, he said nothing about it. The Northern Intelligence Compact, he said instead, setting a piece of paper on the desk between us. I recognized it, the edges of my mission brief, the first page only, the rest still encoded. He had people who could unlock that kind of thing. I had expected he might. A ghost organization. Officially, I agreed. You work for them. I work for the stability of the 3 kingdoms, I said. The compact happens to be the instrument through which that stability is maintained. He looked at me steadily. Up close, seated, unhurried, in proper morning light, King Caleb Drake was even more precisely constructed than I had catalogued from the shadows. The jaw was exactly as advertised. So was everything else, frankly, and I noted it the way you'd note a structural hazard in a building you were planning to work inside. Relevant, requiring management. You are not an Omega, he said. I am classified as one. That's not what I asked. I was quiet for a moment. No, I said finally. I am not an Omega. Not in the way your hierarchy defines it. What are you then? Something your hierarchy doesn't have a category for. He absorbed this. His fingers long, steady, the kind of hands that could hold a sword or sign a death warrant with equal calm, moved once on the desk's surface. A single, controlled tap. His version of processing, I was learning. You've been in my palace for 6 weeks, he said. Undercover. Running an operation. In my house. Yes. To protect me. Yes. The tap again. Without my knowledge or consent. If I'd asked your consent, I said evenly, the contract would have been completed 3 nights ago. You take your evening walk alone, your majesty, unarmed, because you trust your own legend too much. The assassin had your schedule memorized. He had 3 backup entry points. He was very, very good. You keep saying that. It's true. He was the best I've intercepted in 4 years. I paused. He still had a dead spot in his left peripheral. I found it in the first 30 seconds. The amber in his eyes had shifted again. This time I had a name for what I saw there. Not shock. Not anger. Not the reassembled authority from the corridor. Fascination. Dangerous, said the professional part of my brain. Noted, said the other part. The part that had spent 6 weeks watching this man, that had memorized his jaw and his processing tap and the way he looked when he was being genuinely present versus performing presence for an audience, and had not, at any point, been strictly professional about the distinction. I moved on before that second part could say anything else. The internal leak is the priority, I said. Someone inside your court fed the assassin your schedule. Possibly more. The blade he carried had Eastern steel markings, which means someone with trade connections financed the contract. We need to identify who has both access to your schedule and relationships with Eastern trading houses. He said again. That word was becoming a pattern between us, a small flag he kept planting in the conversation, which I kept pretending not to notice. I can run the investigation more effectively with your cooperation than without it, I said. And you need someone you can trust, who isn't already inside your court, to run it. Why would I trust you? Because I had 6 weeks of opportunity to let someone kill you and didn't. Silence. That's a low bar for trust, he said. It's the only bar that matters, I said. Start there. Build higher. He studied me for what felt like a full minute. I did not look away. I had been trained to hold eye contact with alphas of considerable power. It was a skill, not a natural gift, and it had taken years and several deeply uncomfortable training sessions to acquire, but I found, sitting across this particular desk from this particular man, that it did not feel like discipline. It felt like something else. Something I did not have time for. All right, Jesse Calloway, he said finally, and my name in his mouth was not the same thing it had been in the corridor at 2 a.m. It was different now. Deliberate. Like he was deciding something about the shape of it. Tell me about the Eastern trading houses. We worked for 10 days. That is the most professionally accurate thing I can say about what those 10 days were. We worked. He gave me access to records, to household schedules, to the classified correspondence his lord advisors didn't know he kept in a locked compartment behind the false panel in the study's east wall, which I had found on day 3 but graciously pretended to be shown for the first time. He was thorough. Organized. He asked the right questions, and when I gave answers that contradicted his assumptions, he revised the assumptions rather than fighting the information. I had not expected to respect him quite so much. It was inconvenient. We were careful. He referred to me in front of staff as his newly appointed internal auditor, a deliberately dull title that made everyone's eyes glaze over on contact, which was exactly the point. I stopped wearing the Omega sash. I wore gray still, but sharper gray, the kind of gray that communicates administrative function rather than lowest rung of the household. The court noticed the change. They didn't understand it, which meant they whispered about it. I heard the whispers, because I was very good at being in the room where whispers happened. And the whispers ranged from the king has gone soft to the little Omega must have something on him to one remarkably creative theory involving a love potion that I genuinely almost respected for its ambition. Lord Brennan, the architect of my public humiliation, the man who had raised the formal inquiry as a joke, watched me with increasingly uncomfortable eyes every time I passed through the Great Hall. I smiled at him pleasantly every time. This seemed to make things worse, which was, of course, the point. On the 6th day, I found the leak. His name was Counselor Edris Vane. 40 years of loyal service, 6 trade missions to the Eastern Territories, and buried in a coded correspondence log that took me 2 days and one very uncomfortable cipher to crack, a decade of quiet financial relationship with a syndicate that had, 3 months ago, purchased a very expensive contract. He had not done it for money. He had done it because he had a daughter in an Eastern pack who had been taken as collateral on a debt he couldn't pay, and the syndicate had offered him a very simple transaction, the king's schedule for the girl's freedom. I brought the evidence to Caleb on the evening of the 7th day. I watched his face as he read it. He was very still for a long time. Then he set the papers down and pressed one hand flat against the desk's surface, not the processing tap, something slower and heavier, and said, very quietly, "He has a daughter." Yes. They used her. Yes. He was quiet again. I watched the calculation happen, and then I watched something override the calculation, something that lived lower in him than strategy, something that was just feeling. A kind of waited, wordless recognition. "We get the girl back first," he said. I blinked. "Before you move on, Vane," he said, looking up at me. "We locate the daughter and get her clear. Then we handle Vane. Quietly. Without destroying what's left of his life." I stared at him for 3 full seconds, which, for me, is an eternity. "That will be complicated," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "Are you capable of complicated?" I stopped. "Yes." "Then we handle the complicated thing first." He held my gaze, and I let him, and neither of us said the other thing, the thing that had been accumulating for 7 days of shared space and shared work and the specific kind of attention that passes between two people who are each, quietly, revising everything they thought they knew about the other. I said goodnight and left. In the corridor, I stood for a moment with my back against the stone wall and my heart doing something that had nothing to do with threat assessment, and told myself, firmly, that I was a professional and that this was a mission and that the king was a source and a subject and absolutely nothing else. I almost believed it. On the 9th night, it rained. I was in the study. I had taken to working late there after the king retired because the records I needed were there and because I preferred the quality of silence in that room to the quality of silence in the Omega quarters, which smelled of other people's loneliness. I did not expect him to come back. He came back. He appeared in the doorway at the 10th hour, unlaced shirt again. He was apparently a man who shed his authority with his formal clothes at the end of the day, which I found extremely and inconveniently human. With a second cup of something hot and nowhere to put it because he hadn't planned to share it, which meant he had come back on impulse, which told me something I did not need to know. He set the cup on the corner of the desk nearest me. I looked at it, then at him. He sat down across from me. Did not reach for the documents. Did not ask about the investigation. Just sat there, in the rain-quieted room, with the fire low and the candles guttering, and looked at me the way I had been carefully not letting him look at me for 9 days. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You owe me nothing." "I do." He said it without the king voice. Without the authority weight he wore like a second skin in court. Just a man, in an unlaced shirt, in a rain-quiet room. What I said in the great hall was, it was careless. Arrogant. I looked at you for 3 seconds and decided I knew what you were. I was quiet. "I was wrong," he said. "About what you were. About what that was worth." He paused. "I have been wrong about several things since you arrived. I am attempting to be honest about that." I looked at him across the desk's expanse of dark oak and state documents and the untouched cup of something hot. "You didn't know," I said. "Because it was true." "That's not the same as not being wrong." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." The rain against the study windows was the only sound for a long moment. "Jesse," he said, and there it was, the third way he had said my name, the way that was none of the previous ways, the way that arrived in my chest like a key in a lock I had not known I was carrying. "Don't," I said quietly. "I'm not doing anything." "You're doing the thing where you say my name as if it means something you haven't said yet," I said. "And I am in the middle of keeping you alive, which I cannot do effectively if what?" I looked at him steadily. He looked back. The fire popped. The rain came down. "Finish the investigation," I said finally. "Then we'll talk." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, and this nod was different from every other nod I'd catalogued. Slower. More personal. "Finish the investigation," he agreed. I pulled the records back toward me. He stayed where he was, in the chair, and eventually picked up a border dispatch from a side pile and read it in silence, and we worked in the same room in the rain for another 3 hours without speaking, and it was despite everything. Despite all of my professional assessments and catalog distances, the most comfortable I had been in a room with another person in a very long time. I did not put that in the coded journal. Some things do not belong to the work. Chapter 3: The Coup, the Confession, and the Cost of Being Seen. The investigation did not end on day 10 as I had calculated. It ended on day 11 when I found the second thread. Counselor Vane had been the leak, yes. But Vane had been recruited quietly, efficiently, by someone inside the court who had first identified his vulnerability and then introduced him to the syndicate. Someone who had known about the daughter before the Eastern contacts did. Someone with access to the private financial records of every member of the king's household. Lord Brennan. Not just a man with a gift for causing scenes. A man with a gift for engineering them, for creating the distraction of the Great Hall spectacle while quietly pulling threads behind the heiress. He had been building toward the king's removal for 2 years. The contract was the final piece of a much larger coup, one that depended on the court being internally divided, the king being isolated, and nobody with the skill to see the architecture of it being anywhere near the palace. He had been spectacularly unlucky in that last condition. I brought everything to Caleb at dawn on day 11. I expected him to be angry. He was. I expected him to want to act immediately. He did. What I did not expect was that he would turn to me after absorbing all of it, the full scope of it. 2 years of quiet treason, the syndicate relationships, the bought loyalty, the daughter used as a tool. The Great Hall performance designed to destabilize my effectiveness by removing my cover in the most public way possible and say, "He knew about you." Before the formal inquiry, I stilled. "He knew what you were," Caleb said. The amber in his eyes had gone very dark. He raised the inquiry not because he was bored. He raised it because he wanted me to reject you publicly, to damage whatever protection you could provide. The pieces assembled themselves in my mind with the horrible clarity of things that should have been obvious and weren't. Brennan had known or suspected what I was. Had arranged my humiliation not as entertainment, but as operational interference. Had looked at the Omega nobody respected and identified the one thing that might make her less effective, stripping her cover and making her visible inside a court that had not yet learned to respect what it was looking at. He had not accounted for the possibility that I would remain effective regardless. He had also not accounted for what the rejection would produce between me and the king. He made a mistake, I said quietly. Several, Caleb said. His voice had the battlefield tone now, that low, absolute certainty that his general had described. But mostly, he underestimated what happens when you embarrass the woman who is the most capable person in the room. I looked at him. "And what has happened?" I said. "She solves everything," he said simply. "And you can't put the solution back in the box." We moved on Brennan at midday in open court. This was deliberate. Brennan had made his move in public, had used the architecture of the court assembly to execute his plan. We dismantled it in the same space, in front of the same audience of lords, ranking alphas, and senior household staff, with every piece of evidence laid out with the precision of someone who had been trained to make things irrefutable. I stood at the king's right hand. Not the Omega sash. Not the gray uniform. I wore black, my own clothes, brought from the borderlands in a bag everyone had assumed contained spare linens, and I had stopped suppressing the aura signature that this scent-masking compound had kept down for 6 weeks. Not fully. Just enough. Just enough for every alpha in that room to feel the edge of what I was and not quite understand what they were feeling. Lord Brennan stood at the center of the floor, and I watched him understand in the moment his eyes moved from the evidence in the king's hands to my face, to the black clothes and the something in the wear that shouldn't have been there, that he had miscalculated. Not just about me. About everything. "Lord Brennan," King Caleb said, and the room went still the way rooms only go still for the voice of a man who has decided something absolute. "You will answer for what you have done. Not only to this court. Not only to me, but to Counselor Vane's daughter, who is currently being extracted from Eastern captivity by compact operatives, which means that leverage is gone, the syndicate contract is void, and you are standing in this hall with nothing between you and the consequences of your choices." Brennan looked, for a moment, like he might try something. I shifted my weight, almost imperceptibly. 1 inch forward. Balanced. He looked at me. He did not try something. The guards moved in. It was orderly. Professional. The way things go when they have been planned well and executed without flinching. Afterward, the Great Hall buzzed, the specific electric buzz of people who had just been shown a reality they had not known was operating underneath the one they thought they lived in. The lords conferred in tight clusters. The alphas recalibrated with visible effort. Several of the same people who had left 43 days ago were now looking at me with expressions that ranged from respect to something approaching fear. I found I felt nothing about either. The work was done. Vane's daughter was on her way home. The leak was sealed. The coup was dismantled. I was standing in a great hall full of people who had made decisions about me in the first 3 seconds and spent 6 weeks being wrong, and I felt not triumph, not vindication, just the quiet, familiar completion of something finished. The king appeared beside me. Not on the dais, not at the throne. Beside me. On the floor. Standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the particular gravity of someone that large choosing to occupy space at your shoulder rather than above it. "It's done," he said quietly. "Yes," I said. "What happens now?" I turned to look at him. In the hall's full light, without the corridors and the shadows and the rain, just here, real and present and looking at me with those heated amber eyes, he was exactly as significant as I had spent 6 weeks carefully pretending he wasn't. "I file my completion report," I said. "The compact closes the case. My rotation ends. And you leave." "That's typically how rotations work," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't want your rotation to end," he said. My heart did the unprofessional thing again. I let it for exactly 3 seconds, and then I said, "You rejected me in front of this entire hall." "I know." "In front of every lord and every candlestick," I said. "I know. You said I was too weak." I was. He stopped. Steadied himself. "I was catastrophically wrong. And I am asking you, not as a king, Jesse, as a man who has spent 11 days watching you be extraordinary, to tell me if that is something you are willing to let me spend a very long time making right." The hall buzzed around us. Dozens of people recalibrating their world. Nobody was watching us particularly. There was too much else to process, but even if they had been, I found I didn't care. "You don't know what I am," I said quietly. "Not fully." "I know enough," he said. "I know you heard a man in a stairwell and followed him into the dark without hesitation. I know you snapped his neck and spent 3 hours cleaning the corridor before anyone could find evidence. I know you crack Eastern cipher in 2 days and drink terrible tea without complaining and work until the 3rd hour past midnight. I know you smiled at Brennan every time you passed him, and he knew, and you knew he knew, and you did it anyway." I almost smiled. That last one was unprofessional. "It was perfect," he said. "You're perfect." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going to need that in writing," I said. "After what this court heard 3 weeks ago." He laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind I suspected he rarely let people hear, and the sound of it did something irreversible to whatever professional distance I had been maintaining. "Whatever you want," he said. "A public declaration. A formal court reversal. A plaque. Name it." "A plaque," I repeated. She was too weak. Crossed out. In large letters. "In the Great Hall," he said immediately. "Center position. Permanent installation. Above the throne," I said. "Done." I looked at him. He looked at me. The hall buzzed and resettled around us, lords and alphas and the whole reconstituted architecture of the Iron Court, finding its new shape. "You have terrible operational security," I said. "You walk alone at night. You trust your legend as armor. Your guard rotation has a 4-minute gap that any trained operative can drive a body through." "I know," he said. "I need someone on my staff who can fix that." "Your staff," I said carefully. "Among other things," he said. "If you're willing." The candlelight. The rain on the windows I could still almost feel. The quiet room and the work and the cup of hot tea left at the corner of the desk, the small, human gesture of a man who had come back on impulse and found he didn't want to leave. "I'll file a revised timeline with the compact," I said. "The investigation requires an extended presence on site. Follow-up surveillance. Security restructuring." "Of course," he said, very seriously. "Indefinitely extended," I said. "Naturally." "That's the professional assessment." "Absolutely," he said. "And the personal one?" I looked up at him, this enormous, magnificent, catastrophically overconfident man who had looked at me for 3 seconds and decided he knew what I was and spent 6 weeks being wrong. and was now standing at my shoulder in front of the entire court, choosing the floor over the dais. The personal one, I said quietly, is that I have been in your palace for 6 weeks, and the candles keep burning, and I haven't left yet. He reached down and took my hand. Not a performance. Not for the court. Just took it, the way you take hold of something you have decided to keep. His hand was warm. Steady. The kind of hands that could hold a sword or sign a death warrant with equal calm, and were currently holding mine like it was the most important thing they had ever been asked to hold. Don't leave, he said. I turned my hand over and held his back. I wasn't planning to, I said. Jesse Calloway had arrived at the Iron Court with a travel-worn cloak, a sealed letter, and a secret that could have changed everything if anyone had been paying enough attention to ask. Nobody asked. So she swept the floors and memorized the shadows and let the candles burn down to their last inch, and waited with the patience of a woman who had learned, very young, that the most dangerous thing in any room is the person no one is watching. The assassin was for the king, but the Omega killed him first. And the king, the magnificent, jaw-chiseled, catastrophically overconfident King Caleb Drake, did the only sensible thing left available to him. He held on. Some errors, it turns out, are not too expensive to fix. Some women, it turns out, are not too weak to love. And some stories, the ones that begin in the dark, in the silence, over a dead man's borrowed blade, end in light. If this story found you, if Jesse's story is yours in some small way, you are already exactly where the fated ones belong. Like, subscribe, stay in the library. More tales are waiting in the dark. And the most dangerous one hasn't introduced herself yet. End.